This interview was recorded a year before Carl Jung's death. It was never published, never quoted, and as some researchers claim, it disappeared from all official archives. In it, Jung spoke not about psychology, but about what happens after death, about transition, about return, about the great unconscious into which we all eventually descend. In this video, we will reveal one of Carl Jung's most mysterious confessions, his view of the afterlife through the lens of psychoanalysis. We will discuss how Jung understood the soul, the archetype of death, and why he believed that death is not an end, but a transformation. From the dreams of the dying to experiences where the personality vanished only to return, all of this will be part of our journey today. In the mid-20th century, amid scientific progress and Europe's spiritual crisis, Carl Gustav Jung remained a figure straddling two worlds, science and mysticism, reason and soul. He was a renowned psychiatrist, a student of Freud, but his views went far beyond academic boundaries. Unlike his colleagues, Jung did not see death as the end of consciousness. He believed that personality is merely a temporary mask, and behind it lies something greater, an immortal part connected to what he called the collective unconscious. This is what he studied his entire life: dreams, images, archetypes, visions of people on the brink of death. And the closer he came to his own end, the more candid his words became. Jung argued that every person has a shadow, a persona, and a self, levels of the psyche that unfold with spiritual development. But death, in his view, reveals the most important archetype, the great transition. He described the experiences of the dying, who saw images of light, bridges, ladders, women in white, children and elders, symbols common to all cultures. These archetypes, according to Jung, were not mere fantasies of the brain, but keys to a great return. His views were supported by figures like Edgar Cayce, Wolfgang Pauli, and even Albert Einstein. And though mainstream science rejected his mystical theories, Jung continued to write, in diaries, letters, and private interviews. One of these interviews, it is said, vanished immediately after his death. It is this interview that we will attempt to reconstruct today. Carl Jung never saw death as an end. Even in his youth, working as a doctor in a psychiatric clinic, he observed dying patients and noted a strange similarity in their near-death experiences. These people, strangers to one another, described the same symbols: tunnels, bridges, radiance, crossing a river, meeting figures of light or deceased relatives. Jung began to suspect that these were not mere hallucinations of a brain in agony, but manifestations of a deeper psychic reality, the collective unconscious, which holds the universal experience of all generations. He wrote that death is an archetype embedded in the human psyche, just like the archetypes of the mother, the hero, or the shadow. It is not an external event, but an internal process. And if so, then death is not the destruction of personality, but its transition into another form. He increasingly pondered, if archetypes do not die, could the soul also be something that continues to exist in this field, beyond time and body? It was from these reflections that his search for post-mortem truth began. Jung paid great attention to dreams, especially those that came to people on the verge of death. He called these transitional dreams. In them appeared images absent from daily life: giant staircases, cities of light, floating islands, eternal flames, nameless faces. Most astonishingly, these dreams recurred among people of different ages, cultures, and beliefs. Jung noticed that consciousness in these moments seemed to detach from earthly coordinates and immerse itself in something greater, universal. He wrote that this is the path of return to archetypes, where the personal ceases to exist, and the soul integrates into an eternal structure without beginning or end. He himself experienced strange visions in dreams, and claimed that in these states he felt the presence of the dead, heard voiceless thoughts, and received symbols he later found in myths he had never read. For Jung, dreams were not illusions, but a bridge between life and what we call the afterlife. And this bridge vibrated most clearly when a person approached the final threshold. In the penultimate year of his life, Jung, already wheelchair-bound and deeply immersed in contemplation, gave a private interview to a Swiss journalist whose name remains undisclosed. The interview was recorded, but never officially published. According to witnesses, Jung spoke not as a researcher, but as a man with 1 foot beyond the veil. He spoke quietly, almost whispering, as if afraid that his words might shatter the boundary still holding him in his body. He confessed. Death no longer frightened him. He felt that consciousness doesn't disappear. It unfolds, like a flower, a wave, a voice in silence. He asserted that at the moment of death, a person connects not with external reality, but with the deepest core of themselves. And this core is not personality, not memory, not the body. It is a field filled with symbols, eternal structures from which all forms are born and die. His voice was calm. He said, "We fear not death, but the loss of ego. But the soul is not the ego. It is what remains when all else dissolves." When the interviewer asked Jung directly what, in his opinion, happens after death, he gave no clear answer. But his eyes did not waver. He said, "After death, what remains is not the body or the name. What remains is a structure, an assembly, an image." He explained that a person, during life, shapes their soul like a sculpture, through fears, desires, love, pain, doubts. And this sculpture does not vanish. It is what transitions. Jung called it a psychic matrix that continues to exist in the collective unconscious like a wave. It loses the form of personality, but retains its vibrations. He gave the example of music. A melody can be recorded, performed, forgotten, but the sound, once created, does not disappear. It weaves into the universal resonance, so it is with the soul. After death, we become not someone, but something. We return to the symbols from which we were assembled: mother, hero, shadow, sage, child. Jung said that death is the dissolution of personality and immersion into a deeper order. And if a person worked on themselves in life, purified themselves, understood their archetypes, their path after death would be bright and swift. If not, their soul would remain trapped in its own projections. And this, he said, is the true hell. Jung emphasized that after death, a person encounters not objective reality, but their own internal structures turned outward. He said, "What we call the afterlife is not a place. It is a reflection, and each will see what they carry within. Those who lived in fear will meet fear. Those who carried guilt will find themselves in a space where guilt becomes the very fabric of existence." He called these phenomena shadow projections. They do not punish, they teach, but only if a person can realize that these are reflections of themselves. He said the worst fate is to enter an endless loop of one's own ego after death, seeing the same things, feeling the same things, without understanding that the key lies within. He called this the archetypal hell, not because it is punishment, but because it is a dead end. Many souls, he claimed, become trapped in their own fantasies and cannot break free. Only awareness, awakening within death itself, opens the path forward, to the self, to the return to the structure he called light. This was not the light of a lamp or the sun. It was the light of understanding, the light of clarity, the light of truth that a person carries within, but rarely sees in life. In the interview, Jung noted that most people imagine the afterlife light as an external force, something descending from the heavens from the other side. But he said, this is a misconception, born from literal interpretations of religious imagery. He said, the true light is born not outside, but within. It is the moment when the soul recognizes itself, when, passing through projections, fears and archetypes, it suddenly remembers its essence, the part that was never born and never dies. He called this the self in its pure form, not personality, not consciousness, but the very structure of spirit. And it is then that true awakening after death begins. He compared this state to a person seeing dreams for the first time and realizing they had been asleep their whole life. There, in this inner light, everything tied to earthly reality vanishes. Names, roles, even memories. Only presence remains. Still, clear, silent. Jung asserted that this light cannot be summoned or hastened. One can only approach it through honesty with oneself, through accepting one's shadow and rejecting self-deception. It is not a reward or a gift. It is a return. And the light, he said, does not judge. It simply waits for you to return to yourself. In the remaining part of the interview, Jung touched on a topic he rarely discussed openly, his personal brush with death. He recounted an event from 1944 when, after a heart attack, he stood on the threshold of life. Then, he said, he felt his soul leaving his body and ascending. He saw no tunnels or angels. He felt himself rising above the earth, farther and farther, until a temple of light appeared before him, suspended in the void. But at the very moment of entering this temple, his consciousness was recalled. He returned to his body with the sense that he had been shown something he wasn't yet permitted to fully know. This episode left a profound mark. Jung said he no longer feared death, but knew that threshold which he had approached could not be crossed twice. This was not a dream or a vision, but an event he called an initiation. From that moment, he began to describe death not as an end, but as an entry into wholeness. He wrote that the true purpose of life is preparation for death, not as loss, but as a return to a state where there is no separation, where you are everything. Jung believed that all of human life is a process of individuation, a gradual approach to one's true self, a kind of spiritual maturation. And death, in his view, was not a tragic finale, but the final, culminating stage of this transformation. In the interview, he said that everything we fear, dissolution, disappearance, loss of control, is the very point where we must let go. Not outwardly, but inwardly. He asserted that the soul cannot continue its journey while clinging to the ego, to roles, to self-image. Only full acceptance of one's shadow, pain, fears, and mistakes allows a person to pass through the archetype of death undistorted. He called this the ultimate act of honesty with oneself. He emphasized, death does not free one from illusions, it amplifies them if a person has not resolved them in life. Thus, the real work begins long before departure. In this sense, death is not an accident, it is a conclusion. And if individuation is lived consciously, death becomes not an end, but a culmination. The final transition into a state where you no longer seek meaning, because you are meaning itself. Not a personality, but a form of consciousness returning to the whole. The keeper of the interview recording later admitted that they hesitated even to replay it. not out of fear, but from a sense that what was said was not meant for a wide audience. Jung spoke things that could be taken as heresy by both religion and science. He claimed that death is not just a transition, but a merging with something beyond words. He said consciousness is not a product of the brain, but its guest, that the soul does not live in the body, but uses it as a temporary tool. He mentioned that many so-called mental disorders are not deviations, but the soul's attempts to awaken to its true nature. These ideas clashed with medicine, academia, and the church. That is why the interview was never published. Jung didn't ask for this. He simply spoke what he knew, but the world was not ready to hear it. Those who heard the recording said Jung's voice held no doubt. He didn't preach, persuade, or prove. He simply described what he felt, like a man who had glimpsed where definitions end. The final minutes of the interview, according to witnesses, were the most unusual. Jung fell silent. For several minutes, he simply sat, gazing out the window, as if listening to something within. Then he said, "All I have spoken are but metaphors. Truth cannot be spoken. It can only be experienced." He smiled and added, "When you die, you will not be surprised. You will simply know." These words concluded the recording, which over the years became a legend, unofficial, nearly forgotten. Fragments surfaced in diaries, were quoted in letters, but the full text was never released. Perhaps because it held no sensational revelations, no formulas for immortality, only a quiet, profound certainty that death is not a period, but an open door, and that one can only pass through it with a light heart. Jung left this world a year later, peacefully, without struggle. He left no clear doctrine of the afterlife, but he left something greater, a path inward. And if we listen, this path does not begin after death. It begins now, in every honest look at oneself, in every accepted shadow, in every refusal to fear the end. Because the end is simply a return. Carl Jung's greatest revelation was not that death exists, but that it does not destroy. It reveals. He said we do not die once, but gradually. Each time we lose illusions, masks, attachments, and by the final breath, only what is true remains. This, he believed, was the true purpose of psychoanalysis. Not treating symptoms, but preparing for the final transformation. He saw death as an archetype, woven into the fabric of our consciousness. He did not seek proof of life after death. He knew death is not an event, but a stage, a transition. Not disappearance, but a return to the unified field from which all comes and to which all returns. His personal experience of the boundary between worlds became the final point in his great search. He realized that everything he had touched, images, dreams, the unconscious, had always led him to that door. And beyond it was no terror. There was silence, acceptance, light. This interview, hidden for nearly 8 decades, does not reveal new knowledge, but long-forgotten truths. It reminds us that the greatest minds did not renounce the soul. They simply sought a language for it. And Jung found it, through symbols, images, inner myths that connect us all. His words resonate differently today, not as academic hypotheses, but as personal guidance. We live in an era where death is pushed from consciousness, but Jung did not fear it. He gazed into it as into a mirror. And if we dare to do the same, we may hear not emptiness, but the echo of our own awakening. Because beyond death is not void. Beyond death is a return home. Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring the human soul, but only in the quiet of his final years did he begin to speak of the most profound truths. Death, he said, is neither an enemy nor a flaw of nature. It is a threshold, a transition, the completion of a journey that begins not with the last breath, but with the first conscious look inward. He said death does not destroy, it gathers, purifies, returns to essence. And if a person lives in dialogue with the unconscious, with archetypes, with their shadow, then death becomes not an end, but a homecoming. This interview, vanished from all archives, holds no sensational claims, offers no guarantees, promises no salvation. But it carries a voice, calm, quiet, certain. The voice of a man who peered where words end and was not afraid. If what you have just heard resonates with you, support us with a like. It will help others hear what long remained in shadow. Subscribe to After All, to not miss the next journey to the boundary between life and the unknown. And now, a question for you. Do you believe consciousness continues after death? And if so, what do you feel when you gaze into the unseen? Write in the comments. We want to hear your voice.